We're in the middle of this post-truth culture, and I want to exposit what that actually means for a moment just in a little bit, about what it means to be in a post-truth culture. But I want to give you an illustration about what a post-truth culture actually is and how we find ourselves in a situation where we want to offer truth and clarity, and everyone thinks they have the truth, but we're calling ourselves post-truth and what that means. A number of years ago, I was speaking internationally. I was going to Canada, and normally when I travel internationally, I fly. In other parts of Canada I go to, I also fly, but I'm from Detroit. So Canada, strangely enough, is actually the country immediately to my south. The peninsula where Windsor and Leamington and all these other cities come through is actually south of Detroit. Now, normally when I go through the Ambassador Bridge, which is a big bridge that covers the span between Detroit and Canada, because there's the river there, or I'd take the Windsor Tunnel. But this particular engagement was in a town called Wallaceburg. Now, Wallaceburg is actually a little bit north, so I took, there's no bridge that gets you easily to Wallaceburg, but there's a car ferry there. Now, what's interesting about this particular car ferry I had to take when I went over to a town called Algonac and then went over to Wallaceburg is that I'm from the Great Lakes state. So all the car ferries, you know, we're the biggest lakes in the world. All the car ferries are these massive boats that hold 30 and 40 cars. And you expect this sort of like sea voyage almost when you get there. This was not one of those car ferries. This car ferry was this tiny thing that fit 2 cars, and I was half expecting the guy to pull me across the river, sort of Lord of the Rings style, you know, like that. It was this rickety white thing that was just looked like it was a rust bucket. I was like, I'm not sure we're going to make it across this river. So I got onto the car ferry, and I was the only car actually traversing the river that particular morning. And the guy said, why don't you stay in your car? It's super hot outside. It was a Sunday morning in the summer, and I said, sure, I'm happy to stay inside. So I stayed inside my car. Now, I'm horrible with directions. I'm absolutely atrocious with them. I can get lost in my own home. And so I looked down at my GPS just to make sure that, yes, the destination internationally when I got over to Canada would actually be something that I could actually find my way to. So I looked down at it. It was like that exact moment when I looked down at the GPS when our the boat, left the dock. So I didn't see us leave. But because I was in the car, the mass of the car and the suspension of the car absorbed the energy of me leaving the dock. So I didn't feel us leave. So I didn't see it, I didn't feel it. So when I looked up, I had that strange vertigo you have. You know how you're sitting there at the intersection, and there's a bus next to you, and the bus moves forward, and you're not quite sure if the bus is going forward or you're moving backward? And you have that sort of vertigo, you're thinking, oh my goodness, am I going to kill somebody? So what do? To clear up all the confusion and the slight bit of nausea you feel, you look for a fixed point of reference. You look for a building, you look for a mailbox, you look for a street light, something that says whether you're moving or not. I was on a river. Everything's moving. So it didn't help me to look at the river. The river wouldn't help me. The boat couldn't help me because if I was moving, the boat would be moving. What I had to look at was the distant shore to see, was it in fact coming closer? And because of the distance of the shore, I had to take a little bit longer before all the sort of vertigo and nausea went away. It occurs to me now, I could look at my rearview mirror, I suppose, and seen if we were moving, but I looked to the distant shore. That's when the confusion went away. Culture today is the river. Everything moves, everything shifts, nothing seems to stay the same. There are no fixed points of references anymore. In fact, we left dry land so long ago, it seems to me, that we've not only forgotten what solidity feels like, we've actually resented feeling solid. We like being in the river. That's the post-truth culture, where we know there are fixed points of reference, but we resent them if they limit us. We've unchained ourselves from the fixed points of reference so that we can do and say and be and go whatever we want, whenever we want to do it. Think of the questions we're asking ourselves now. The questions we're asking whether you're an adult or you're a young person. The questions you have to deal with. These are not questions I had to deal with when I was 12. And my son and my daughters have to deal with these questions, and your sons and your daughters and your grandkids are dealing with these questions. What does it mean to be male? What does it mean to be female? What does it mean to be human at all? With the new sort of movement of transhumanism, where you can append sort of mechanical and computer electronics devices to your body to actually download memories and consciousness, and we're actually exploring these ideas. This is not science fiction anymore, it's science fact. What does it mean to be a human being? How about the political issues we have today? What's right? What's left? What's conservative? What's liberal? What's in the middle? All these questions we're asking ourselves, we no longer know anymore. In fact, I was looking at an article recently where the writer was talking about the fact that children now have an unprecedented level of anxiety. Not necessarily depression, although that's also on an increase, but they have a high level of anxiety because of the uncertainty of the future. And why? Because we're telling kids, very young kids, you better get your ducks in a row. If you're going to be an athlete, you better start as early as possible and get in as many practices as you can as early as possible, because your chances are going to be limited later on in life. So get it done now. Or you want to know where you're going to go in terms of your academic career, you better get your ducks in a row, and you better do that now. You want to know what you are, what it means to be a boy or a girl, to be a man, to be a woman, to be a human, you better figure that out now. And we let them figure it out. Can you imagine the anxiety level of telling an 8-year-old, you've got to figure it out? They're not equipped to do that yet. They need us. That's what we're here for. We're abdicating our thing to say, you know what, you're in the river. Join me in the river. We're floating. You know, there was a similar phenomenon that happened in the 80s. I happen to be a child of the 80s, as you guys now know because you sung my birthday. There was this phenomenon called nuclear war psychosis or Cold War psychosis, where children were waking up in the middle of the night and they were screaming in terror because they thought the US and the USSR had finally done it. They finally pushed the button that turned the Cold War very hot, very fast. And everyone had irradiated each other, and a nuclear war had broken out. I don't know if you remember that or not. And amidst all that confusion, where superpowers were saying, we have the voice, we have the power, we're the ones who are going to lead you into the future, whatever it was, and they were all competing, there was a song by a band called Genesis. And the song was Land of Confusion. Do you remember the words to that song? Oh, Superman, where are you now? When everything's gone wrong somehow, these men of steel, these men of power are losing control by the hour. The men of steel, the men of power are losing control by the hour. Could that song, written 30 years ago, not be written today? And the voices are coming up and they're saying, amidst all the confusion and all the things that are happening, I'll be that voice. I'll be that Superman or that Superwoman or that man of steel, that woman of steel, and I'll lead you out of it. Some might be credible and some might not be. But they're rising up, and we're looking for someone, and they're always seeming to lose control by the hour. It seems to be a doom and gloom thing. Now, I think, hopefully by the time I'm done, you'll see that I'm actually not a pessimist. I'm quite an optimist, actually. We have to get through, I think, some of the things that we're facing culturally and look at it square in the face and say, this is what's happening. But I think there is a hope. There really is a hope. Now, as if to prove the point I'm trying to make here, Oxford English Dictionaries in 2016 named its word of the year, and every year it names a word of the year. And that word doesn't have to be a new word. It can be a word that's sort of come into fashion. And it describes the culture. So the ethos and the pathos of the culture, what's capturing the imagination or directing the Western culture at that particular time. And in 2016, at the end of the election cycles and all this stuff, the word of the year was post-truth. And they define a post-truth culture this way. A post-truth culture is one that elevates feelings and preferences above facts and truth. They elevate feelings and preferences above facts and truth. Now, that's a very important thing for us to understand because it's a little different than a postmodern culture. And maybe you've heard the idea of a postmodern culture. A postmodern culture which yields to a sort of relativistic thinking where all truth is relative. There is no objective truth. It's just my truth is my truth, your truth is your truth, and if your truth happens to be different than my truth, that's fine, keep it to yourself. But the moment you claim that a truth is objectively true, regardless of human opinion, well, that's a power move. You can't do that because all truth is relative. That's postmodernism. That's different than post-truth. A postmodern culture says there is no objective truth, and you can reason with someone like that. When they say there's no objective truth, you can simply ask the question back, is that objectively true? And they'll see the inherent contradiction in their very statement. To claim that there's no objective truth is to say that this is objectively true, that there are no objective truths. It's inherently self-defeating, and so you can easily show this is a problem, and you can begin to reason with that person. A post-truth culture is different, where a postmodern culture says there is no objective truth. A post-truth culture says there is an objective truth, but I don't care. My preferences and my feelings matter more. Now, if my preferences and my feelings happen to line up with the truth, all the better. But let's make no mistake, truth is there, but truth is secondary. That is a very serious problem. Here's why it's a problem. Because if truth is no longer the primary motivation by how we engage with one another, that doesn't lead to freedom. That leads to chaos. See, we use this word freedom all the time. Think about how often we use the word freedom. We're a freedom-loving people. That's what America's all about. Freedom, freedom, freedom. We talk about it all the time. And we should. But we've sort of lost track of what true freedom actually is, and we've focused on one narrow view of freedom. It's the ability to do whatever you want. That's not actual freedom. That's one facet of freedom. There's also the element of freedom is to do whatever you should in accordance with the purpose for which you were created. There are bounds to it. But we don't want bounded freedom. We're not looking for bounded freedom. We want freedom to do whatever we want, which means we're not looking for freedom, we're looking for autonomy. There's two different things here. So we often use the words autonomy and freedom synonymously. They're not synonymous. They're different. Autonomy, the word, comes from two Greek words, autos, meaning self, and nomos, meaning law. So if you are autonomous, you are a law unto yourself. Now, if I'm autonomous, I'm also a law unto myself. Here's the problem. When my law unto myself, what I desire, what I think is the law for me, conflicts with your law, and you're just as much of an authority as I am, because truth isn't important, what matters is preferences. When my preferences and my law unto myself conflicts with your law unto yourself, who is going to decide between us? It won't be truth, because truth is secondary. It's going to be power and the loudest microphone, and that leads to chaos. But see, we've sacrificed something. In our quest for autonomy, we've sacrificed truth and clarity on the altar of human autonomy. We've sacrificed truth and clarity on the altar of human autonomy, and what's resulted is this culture of confusion, where we're awash in the river, and there's no fixed points of reference. What I want to be, say, do, or act, or feel like is up to me. And what you want to act, say, do, or feel like is up to you. And if we embrace confusion as a virtue, then I don't have to conform to any guidelines, because we're confused, and confusion is considered a virtue. If you're confused sexually, well, you're an exploratory hero. If you're confused morally, well, you're progressive. If you're confused religiously, all religions lead to God, and none of them are equally true or are equally valid, or maybe they're all equally invalid, who knows? You're considered tolerant. But if you have clarity, these are the bounds of human behavior. These are the bounds of human morality. These are the bounds, or one particular religious claim happens to be true above all others. You're bigoted, regressive, and intolerant. So confusion is a virtue because it allows you to be whatever you want. It allows others to be what they want. And clarity is a sin because it restricts us. So confusion is a virtue and clarity is a sin. So the question becomes this: how do you speak to a culture that values confusion and decries clarity? How do you speak to a culture that wants autonomy, not truth? How do you speak to it? Well, a couple of ways. The first way, I think, is to point out the consequences of a culture of confusion. That's the first thing. The first thing is to point out the consequences of a culture of confusion. And if you're struggling with this yourself, and maybe you're someone here who either is struggling with the Christian faith or doesn't really sort of think it's sort of myopic and narrow-minded in its views, and that it's not really embracing the current ethos of everyone's views are equally true, I want to challenge you to look at the consequences of that level of fuzziness and confusion. So we look at the consequences first, but then we offer the hope. Too many people are offering analyses of the problems and then saying, well, you say, what's the solution? And they have nothing. I think there's a solution to be had here. I really do. So I think if we go to the consequences, what is the first consequence of a culture of confusion where we sacrifice clarity on the altar of human autonomy? The first consequence, the first victim of the culture of confusion is that we sacrifice our ability to reason. We sacrifice our God-given ability to reason and to exercise wisdom when we say all things are equally valid and your preferences matter more than truth. Let me give you an example of what I mean here. A number of years ago, I was giving my testimony about my journey from Islam to Christ. And there was a large room, it was a men's breakfast, it was a large room of people, and there was a guy sitting in the front row, and he was taking extremely copious notes, but he also taking notes at a furious pace, like smoke from the page kind of notes. Like, you're saying smoke? What's going on over here? And I knew, and it's typical, that this is the kind of person who will engage with me in a lengthy conversation after we're done, which by the way, I love. That's fine with me. 'Cause I want to see what's stirring the heart and what's stirring the mind. Well, sure enough, as I got done with my story, I sort of folded up my notes. I didn't use an iPad back then. I just used actual paper notes. Folded them up and talked with some people, and he came up to me. And he said to me, "Hey, can I show you something?" And that's signal for, can I talk for a long time with you? Which is fine again. He said, "I appreciate the way you didn't disagree with your former worldview. And you talked about why you became a Christian." I'm like, well, you didn't quite get the point, because if I didn't disagree with it, I wouldn't have become a Christian. I would have stayed what I was. But it's my goal and my approach in talking about different religious systems or non-religious systems, not to just bash or even try at all to bash another belief system and call it false. I hold up the gospel as true. And by definition, everything else that comes against it is false. So hold up the light. That's the goal. Hold up the light. So he picked up on this a little bit. He said, "Well, I want to show you something. Here's my views on this." And he showed me a piece of paper. And in the piece of paper was drawn a big capital T right in the middle and had a circle around it. And he said, "This represents objective truth. There is an objective truth, a holy truth even, and there is something out there. But we don't know all of it. None of us know all of it." I said, "So far you and I agree. Truth exists. We don't know all of it, because if I knew all truths, then I'd be all-knowing. Only God is all-knowing, so now we agree that I'm not God." So far we're on the same page. We're on safe ground. I'm not God. He said, but around the big capital T truth, he had all these little lowercase t's on the diagram, and they all had arrows pointing towards the capital T. He said, if the big T represents objective truth, the little lowercase t's represents all of us. All of us have versions of the truth. Though they're incomplete, we're eventually going to come to the objective truth and be enlightened into it. So I wanted to challenge that a little bit, and I said, "All of us have versions of the truth?" He said, "Yes, all of us." I said, "Mao Zedong, Adolf Hitler, Pol Pot, Joseph Stalin, name your despot, the person you hate the most, and that person had a version of the truth?" Here's where his words were. "I can't tell you that I disagree. My worldview does not allow me to disagree with them, even though I don't prefer their version of the truth." Like, buddy, if it's okay to say who you disagree with, Hitler ranks up at the top. It's okay to say, "I don't like Hitler and what he thought, what he stood for." Most people don't get mad at you for that. And those who do get mad at you, well, okay. He said, I can't disagree with anybody, so I wanted to challenge that a little bit. And I said, "Are you telling me you can't disagree with anybody?" He said, "That's right, I can't disagree with anybody. You got it." I said, "Sure you can." He said, "No, I can't." I said, "You just did it." It's a bit of a setup. That comes from being a trial lawyer for 16 years. But I wasn't trying to humiliate him. It really wasn't. It was a private conversation. What I was trying to get this otherwise very intelligent man, by the way, and thoughtful, is to see is that though his goals were right-hearted, he wanted everyone to agree and to get along, and I understand that, I get that. His preference and feeling was everyone's worldviews are equally valid, and that'll create some kind of a peaceful coexistence, which it never does, never has. He subverted truth, that they can't all possibly be valid. We have to disagree on something, because truth, by definition, is exclusive. He subverted that to his preference. His preference mattered more. And an otherwise very brilliant man actually sacrificed his ability to reason on the altar of his preference. That is a post-truth culture. It's funny, I was walking outside, going to my car, and there the man was, by his car saying, "If I can't disagree with anybody, but I disagree with him," and he was doing that kind of a thing. It was clearly making an impact. Well, this doesn't have just sort of personal beliefs implications, it actually has societal implications. We're seeing it now in our day in spades, it seems to me, all across the United States and all across the Western world. You might recall in 2015, there was an incident at the University of Missouri where the football team had actually organized a protest, a public protest, because they were protesting the mishandling of some racial animus and some racial tensions that were happening on the campus, and they were saying the president didn't do his job on these things. Well, a protest, by definition, is public. If it's not a public thing that garners media attention, well, then it's a bunch of guys sitting around complaining. But if it's a protest, you want to get public awareness of your issue. So naturally, the press came to the University of Missouri. ESPN sent a photojournalist to cover the event, not to ask questions, just to take pictures of the event to bring awareness to what the football players and the students who were rallying around them were protesting. Well, this particular photojournalist from ESPN happened to run afoul of a safe space where you can't have photojournalists, though it's public and it's out in the middle of a public square of a public university. Somehow a journalist isn't allowed there. You can see the video on YouTube as he's trying to snap pictures of the football players and other students protesting. A woman jumps in front of him. She starts yelling at him to leave. Get this oppressor out of here. Get this invader or whatever she called him. Get him out of here. Get him out of here. She starts calling out, I need some muscle over here. Who's going to help me remove this guy? She's forcibly removing a journalist from a public protest at a public university. Do you know what she teaches for a living at that university? Communications at the journalism school. Now that's funny and tragic at the same time, isn't it? Because an otherwise, once again, brilliant person has sacrificed reason on the altar of her preference. And this has serious implications. These are not just one-off indications. So the first thing that a post-truth culture does when we sacrifice clarity and truth on the altar of human autonomy is we lose our sense of reason and our God-given wisdom. The second thing we lose is our sense of integrity. A post-truth culture, there are two versions of a post-truth culture. There's the part that subverts truth to our preferences, but there's also the part that ignores truth for our agenda. No matter what side of an aisle you're on, everyone's been infected. There's no one immune, no, not one, from a post-truth culture. I can tell you this, I've seen it. People are engaging what I call the Hitlerization of social commentary, where if you don't agree with me, somehow you're Adolf Hitler. You become a Nazi because you don't agree with me. Now notice what I said. I didn't say if you disagree with me, you're a Nazi. If you don't agree with me, you're a Nazi. You can't even be neutral on a subject. You can't even take a concerted effort to say, I need to think this through. You've got to agree with me more than I do. Otherwise, somehow you're horrible. And so what happens in that kind of a milieu, in that kind of an environment, is that we're willing to say, here's the truth, but I'm going to lie about it because it serves a greater agenda, whether it's social, political, whatever it is. So if you're on the right, only the left tells lies. If you're on the left, only the right tells lies. And if you're in the middle, the right and the left both tell lies. No one ever takes the introspective look at themselves and says, what is my sense of integrity? I don't care if it's political. I don't care if it's social. I don't care if it's even religious to some degree, or even scientific. I mean, there are studies that show that there are quite a few published peer-reviewed journal articles in scientific journals where they're saying that these findings are fact. They cannot reproduce the findings because someone fudged the data somewhere. It's a shockingly high number. In other words, putting a lab coat on doesn't suddenly free you from being human. You are subject to what it means to be human. And being human means being imperfect and being subject to a post-truth culture. So first, we lose our sense of reason. Second, we lose our sense of integrity. And third, and I think this is one of the most dastardly parts of the whole thing, is we lose our sense of moral accountability and human value. Why do we lose moral accountability? Because if we are the determiners of what's right and wrong, if we are truly autonomous, laws unto ourselves, then we have no need for a higher law. There is no objective standard above us. We, as Protagoras said so many centuries ago, are the measure of all things. If we are the measure of all things, then what business does God have telling us anything? We have no accountability to him because we are the highest creature on the earth, intellectually speaking, and we're social animals and all these things. If we're the highest creature, then there is no accountability except to each other, maybe, but even then, you can see in the world today, how often do we have accountability to each other? We're terrible at this. That's just the reality of it. But in a post-truth culture that elevates preferences over truth, we have Protagoras, who says, man is the measure of all things. Then we have someone like Tom Flynn, a thoughtful writer, by the way, secular humanist, an atheist writer. He basically says the sort of modern version of what Protagoras says. Protagoras says, man is the measure of all things. Here's what Tom Flynn says. This is a bit of a mouthful, so just give me a second and I'll try to absorb what he says here. But remember, he's just basically saying man is the measure of all things. He says, secular humanism maintains that through a process of value inquiry informed by scientific and reflective thought, men and women can reach rough agreement concerning values, crafting ethical systems that deliver optimal results in a broad range of circumstances. That's a lot. He's saying through value inquiry and scientific thought and all these things, we can come to rough agreement concerning ethical systems and values. Rough agreement. Have we done this? With all of our brilliance and all of our educations, I want you to think about this. I have this little device in my pocket that we laughingly call phones. This little device has more computing power in it than the first rockets that went to the moon. And each one of you has one. We've never been more connected, more technologically advanced. Have we used these things to reach any kind of thing called rough agreement concerning values? Or have we used them to objectify people and look at things we shouldn't look at? Have we used them to send pictures we shouldn't send? Or to bully people because we get to be anonymous now? Or to just troll videos and make fun of people who happen to dare to put their message or their ideas or their views out there? Or to be narcissistic? I'll tell you what, I saw this commercial and I'm an Apple product guy, I have them here, but I gotta say this one commercial bugged me immensely. It's walking the Olympics, and it's this one with Muhammad Ali saying how he's the greatest. Have you seen this commercial? Where he's saying, I am the greatest, and he's talking about how great he actually is. And the joke is that he says, my only humility is that I don't know how great I actually am. That kind of thing. And all it is this, it's a commercial about how well the iPhone takes selfies. We're talking about how great we are. I'm the greatest, look how many photos I have of me. Now, I'm not against selfies, I got quite a few on my phone too, but I think that the whole idea here is propagating this idea of narcissism, where we are lost into ourselves. Have we reached this rough agreement concerning values despite all of our genius? Because then you go and you look at our universities, what happened at Middlebury College last year when Charles Murray, who's no relation by the way, Charles Murray, who's a lightning rod conservative scholar, goes to speak at the college, and the students come and they turn their back on him. But in fact, he had to speak in a room, for one of his talks, speak in a room where there were no students present. He had to speak to a camera, and the students were in another room because he feared for his physical safety. And then when he walked out, he and Allison Stenger, who was a professor there, who I think doesn't share his political views in the slightest bit, were walking to his car, and they were both assaulted by a mob. And she was left, I think, with a twisted neck and her hair pulled and all kind of stuff. Then you look at what happens at various universities where if you have a lightning rod speaker, you don't confront that speech with more eloquent or better or more thoughtful speech. What you do is you throw things through windows and set things on fire. And so I understand that there's a difference of opinion and anger happening here. But Tom Flynn says that human beings, with our autonomy, if we are the measure of all things, we will reach rough agreement concerning values. I have news for him and for so many. We have not reached rough agreement concerning values. We've just reached the agreement to be rough. Right. And that's a very serious issue because we have subverted our sense of accountability. And we have decided who's right, who's wrong, and who's valuable and who's not. And you'd think after all these years, with our intelligence and all of our learning and history, we'd be past the idea of a slave trade, but we're not. People are humanly trafficked every day, millions upon millions. But we're the arbiter of things. Reminds me of that poem from Alexander Pope and his long poem, Essays on Man. I'll quote just a part of it, but it speaks so aptly to the way in which we've usurped God's authority. He says, go wiser thou, and in thy scale of sense, weigh thy opinion against providence. Call imperfection what thou fanciest such. Say, here he gives too little, and there too much. Destroy all creatures for thy sport or gust. Yet cry, if man's unhappy, then God's unjust. If man alone engross not heaven's highest care, alone made perfect here, immortal there, snatch from his hand the balance and the rod, rejudge his justice, and be the God of God. In pride, in reasoning pride, our error lies. All quit their spheres and rush to the skies. Men, pride is still aiming at the blessed abodes. Men would be angels, angels would be gods. Aspiring to be gods if angels fell, aspiring to be angels, men rebel. And who but seeks to invert the laws of nature sins against the eternal cause. What he's saying is that we have decided that we can determine whatever's right for all of us at any one time, or better yet, any one of us, which means that my preferences sometimes are more important than yours. And I get to subject you to what I want because my microphone's louder, or I have more press coverage, or I have more guns. And in all that, we've seen people actually argue these things, where certain people don't have value. They've actually argued this. This is from three philosophers. All of them are ethicists at our highest universities in the world. It was Peter Singer who argued, and still argues to this day, that people can kill newborn babies, not preborn, newborn babies, because the baby doesn't have actual value unless the parents give the baby a value, because the baby doesn't have the cognitive ability to reason and value itself. So if the parents don't value it, it has no value, and there you go. Alberto Giubilini and Francesca Minerva out of Australia argue in a journal in medical ethics that people could do the same thing. Men and women can kill their newborn babies because they don't have value unless the parents give it to them. We've suddenly, see what's happened? When we lose moral accountability, because there's no one above us, we suddenly can say who has value and who doesn't. And why is it going to stop at babies who can't seem to have the cognitive abilities? When does it start to encroach upon people who have mental challenges or people who have physical challenges? And we suddenly become the ones who can say who's valuable and who's not. We have humanized objects. We think about this. Do you get twitchy when this isn't around? We talk about how we love our phones. We've humanized objects. We've objectified humans. That's the culture of confusion. Now, that sounds doom and gloom and it sounds terrible, and I realize that I have not made your spirits high so far. But let me say this in the time I think we have remaining here. I want to make sure I'm clear on something. I think there is a real hope and a real answer to this. And I can tell you this, and it sounds like a brag, but it doesn't mean to be. I can assure you, because it's not just me at these events. When we go to universities, we have our open forums. We want to engage in the questions with the brightest minds that our culture is producing. We go to University of Michigan, where 3,500 come to our event. It's absolutely packed. There's not a seat in the house left. We're turning people away, despite the fact that Michigan and Michigan State were playing a basketball game against each other down the street that very same night. They came to our event, and they were there asking questions, skeptic after skeptic, non-Christian after non-Christian. The next day, Michigan State University, 9,500 filled the Breslin Center for our talk called Ask Anything. And they came wanting to know if there were answers. And they were coming with gotcha questions. I'm sure some had some level of animus and anger, but they weren't coming with gotcha questions. They were coming with questions of, I want to know what the answer actually is. What do you have to offer? And I can go on and on. Ravi and Vince Vitale were just at University of Florida, where I think it was 7,000 showed up to that. Here's my point in telling you all that, not to talk about the great numbers that come out to hear RZIM. That's not the point. The point is there are numbers at all, and they come in our most post-truth cultures of subcultures, which is the universities. The students are tired of it. They want truth, but they also recognize that they've been told, it's all unlimited. You can do what you want. They're seeing a hope. See, the culture rejects the Bible as the source for freedom because they see it as against freedom. And it's not against freedom. The Bible is against autonomy. It's against the idea of unchained autonomy because that just leads to chaos. But it is pro-freedom. It's all about freedom. That's what the narratives are, from Adam and Eve to the Hebrews who were in bondage to Egypt, to the liberation that's celebrated in the Passover, to the freedom from sin that Christ himself tells us he offers us. It's about freedom, but you have to understand what freedom actually is and get past this idea that it's autonomy. That's not what it is. Freedom, by necessity, includes boundaries. Let me give you an illustration to show you what I mean. In order to have freedom, you have to have boundaries. I'm blessed with a very large backyard. One of the reasons we bought our house was the yard was a big one. We could have our kids play in it and all these things. And my kids were, in fact, I only had one at the time. I have three now, but I only had one child at the time, and he was barely a year old when we moved in. He might have been a little bit less than a year old, actually, now that I think about it. And we were worried. because our backyard, though big, backs up to a main road. And there are cars and trucks whizzing by all the time. Now, if we didn't have a boundary beyond which our kids could not play, then they wouldn't be able to have the enjoyment of the backyard. In other words, they wouldn't be free to enjoy the backyard for its intended purpose. Because kids being kids, if the ball bounces into the street, they'll run after it and a car will come by and it'll end their life. So because of my anxiety about them not being able to understand that boundaries are actually, that there needs to be a boundary, I gave them a boundary. You cannot play beyond this line. And because they had a boundary, not too much, but just enough, they were able to enjoy the backyard for its intended purpose. Freedom always requires some level of boundary, because otherwise it results in chaos and in some cases death. It was Chesterton who made that wonderful statement that even the thing we think of as the most boundless, if there's no boundaries to artistic freedom, we think. So the arts are boundless in their freedom. Chesterton, in his own way, his inimitable way, says, no, that's not true. He says, art is limitation. The essence of every picture is the frame. If you draw a giraffe, you must draw him with a long neck. If you, in your bold, creative way, hold yourself free to draw a giraffe with a short neck, you will find that you are not free to draw a giraffe at all. The moment you step into the world of facts, you step into a world of limits. In other words, truth and limitations are a part of what freedom actually is. You can free things from alien or accidental laws, but not from the laws of their own nature. You may, if you like, free a tiger from his bars, but do not, please do not free him from his stripes. You may free a camel from his hump, but you will find out you have freed him from being a camel at all. Everything has limits if you deal with truth and facts. Does Jesus give us something that can help us out here? And I think he does. I want to share with you a passage of Scripture, and I want to make a couple of pairings that Jesus makes and highlight a couple of these things. Maybe you've seen them before, maybe you haven't, but bear with me because I think it's important for us to understand where the hope actually comes from. In John chapter 8, verses 31 to 36, it's a familiar encounter, but hopefully if you see something in this, we can draw something beautiful out of it. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, they believed him, they were followers of his, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Did you notice that? You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Knowing truth is part and parcel, inextricably linked to the truth. You can't have truth and freedom. Knowing truth is linked to freedom. You can't have freedom without truth, and truth, by definition, is limited in the fact that it excludes falsehood. So truth and freedom always go together. Their response is what amazes me. They answered him, we are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? You're offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. Did you forget Egypt? 400 years of slavery, the liberation of which, from which I should say, you celebrate every year at the Passover. You've never been enslaved to anyone. And you know when they're saying this statement? While they're under Roman occupation. See what happens in a post-truth mindset is that your preferences to be autonomous and to be free and to say no one's ever enslaved me, you forget the facts you celebrate every year because truth is no longer important. But Jesus, so beautifully, so wonderfully, boldly, yet even gently, says to them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. Now, did you catch it? You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You will know the Son, and the Son will set you free. The Son is the truth. He made that statement about himself. I am the truth. You can't just say that kind of thing and let it hang. You got to back that kind of thing up. Who do you think you are saying you're the truth? They asked him that question in John chapter 2. By what authority do you do these things? Now, what's amazing about the Lord is that unlike other systems of belief where they give you sort of esoteric meanings behind things that are unfalsifiable, Jesus says, you want to know how I know you can trust me? Destroy this temple, meaning my body, and I will raise it up again in 3 days. That is either true or it's false, and your opinions don't matter. His tomb was either empty or it was full, and that's all there is to it. So he said, I am going to raise myself from the dead. I have the power to lay my own life down, and I have the power to raise it up again. No man takes my life from me. I lay it down. That is either true or it's false. He didn't say, look to the wisdom of my teaching and the beauty of my words, and it'll make you cry once in a while, although that's true. I've been brought to tears by just a couple of words that the Lord has said. But other people can claim that. It's subjective claims. He gives you an objective test to know why he's the one to follow. People often ask me this question, Abdu, you've studied so many religious systems and different views in the world. Why do you trust Jesus above anybody else? And here's my answer. Jesus rose from the dead, and guys who rise from the dead have credibility. We claim to be the truth that sets us free. So I want to ask this question. Has your autonomy set you free? Has it your ability to see and look at and enjoy whatever you want because these little machines or whatever else it is? You've never had access to more information. You've never had access to more images. Have they freed you? Or have they enslaved you to making objects of other people or making objects of scorn and derision other people? Or have you been the object of objectification or derision? Jesus says that he is the one who frees you. You know, we were at Yale University, and a student asked a question at the end of our talk on the post-truth culture. He said, you know, I see the connection between truth and freedom, I get that, but can you explain to me where the resurrection actually points to all this? How does what Jesus does possibly lead us to freedom? What's the connection between Jesus and freedom? And here's the ultimate answer. Here's the ultimate answer. Freedom is the ability to do what you want in accordance with what you should because of what you are. Jesus frees you from being a slave to sin so you and I can be what we were meant to be, people made in God's image. That's the gospel. And in a short time, I want to give you two things about where this freedom actually lies in your own life and in my own life and in our own hearts. The first thing is this, is the hope that the gospel offers to you and to me. Apart from a post-truth culture that says preferences matter more, Jesus says, I will change your preferences so they will line up with the truth. What that means is this, that offers hope. It offers a global hope and a personal hope. Let me share with you the global hope. It was Mark Twain who once said, I believe it was Mark Twain who said this, history does not repeat, but it does rhyme. What he meant by that was this, is that when you look at the patterns of history, it won't always be exactly the same, but the lessons are learned through that, and what's good or bad, you'll see it. The Christian church has not always done the best job in the world at helping people, but overall, it's done amazing things because of the message of the gospel. It was David Bentley Hart who said that the idea of equality, of personhood itself, actually was not something that people scorned before the Christian message. Like, we don't believe in equality. They didn't even know what it meant. That idea never even occurred to them. The word person, you know where that comes from? It's the Latin word persona, which means mask. In other words, it's foreign to you. The state put on you the mask of personhood if you earned it. Being born did not qualify you. It was the Christian message, Hart points out, that says that we're all equally sinners, but we're all equally offered redemption because Christ died for everyone, and he invites everyone to partake of that gospel. That's when equality was born. And it was the Emperor Julian who said, the pagan emperor, who was the apostate, who was a Christian and then became an apostate, who said that the insipid Galileans, meaning Christians, were actually winning the hearts and minds of the Roman populace because they viewed our number, the pagans, as equal to theirs in terms of value. They were helping everyone. Then you see the plague ships teetering off the coasts. No one wants them to come to the shores because they might bring the plague with them. And it was Christians who got on their skiffs and went out to the ships and ministered to these people so that they could actually be healed. Many of them contracted plague themselves and they died to help these people. Fast forward, not too long ago, but many centuries after those days, but not too long ago from our days, when Christians were going into Ebola-infested West Africa, contracting Ebola themselves so that they could help people who were made in God's image, who were equal to all of us. History does not repeat, but it does rhyme. And when the gospel is the chorus, the rhyme is beautiful. When the gospel is the chorus, the rhyme is beautiful. So important is this that it affected an atheist named Matthew Parris. He wrote an article, this atheist Matthew Parris, who was born in what was called Nyasaland, and now it's Malawi. He returned to Malawi after 45 years to see what was going on there. And he wrote an article because of the message, the impact of the Christian message. His article was called Why Africa Needs Christianity. Listen to these words. Now a confirmed atheist, I've become convinced of the enormous contribution that Christian evangelism makes in Africa, sharply distinct from the work of secular NGOs and government projects and international aid efforts. These alone will not do. Education and training alone will not do. Listen to what non-Christian Matthew Parris says. In Africa, Christianity changes people's hearts. The rebirth is real. The change is good. A hope. But it goes from a global hope, and that's happening. It goes from a global hope to a very personal hope, because there's times when you're thinking all these great things are happening, and the hospitals are being built, and the relief efforts are happening across the world. But what about me? What about when I look at myself with a self-loathing, or I don't even know who I am? I struggle with whether it's sexual infidelity or sexual desires that I don't want, or an identity crisis. I don't know if it's whether it's the gender issue or it's something personal to you, whatever it might be. What about my own identity? Who am I? I have done so much in my life that I have no ability to redeem myself for, and there are so many who are angry, and rightfully so. Who am I? See, the problem is we walk through life not understood. I don't care if you're struggling with something, whether it's a sexual issue or it's a social issue or whatever it might be, or you're seeing other people who don't look like you as less than you, and you realize that's wrong and you have a hard time overcoming that animus, that bias you might have. We're going through life not understood because we don't know who we are. How can we know who somebody else is? And there's all this tension, but the hope comes from knowing who we are first and then seeing other people in God's image. It was Thomas Bracken who wrote that poem, Not Understood. What a beautiful poem. I want you to apply it to your own life and society today. It says, not understood, we move along asunder. Our paths grow wider as the seasons creep. Along the years, we marvel and we wonder why life is life, and then we fall asleep. Not understood. Not understood how many breaths are aching for lack of sympathy. Day by day, how many cheerless, lonely hearts are breaking. How many noble spirits pass away. Not understood. Oh God, that men would see a little clearer, or be less harsh when they cannot see. Oh God, that men would draw a little nearer to each other, and then they would draw nearer to thee, and then be understood. If you draw closer to God and he tells you who you are made in his image, no matter what you think, believe, say, act like, or whatever it might be, you are made in his image. That cannot be taken away from you. In fact, you can't take it away from you. And he tells you this is who you are. And how do you know you have value? How do you know? It's because Christ didn't say something about sin. He did something about your sin to tell you you have value. I want to just close with one more quotation, if you don't mind my doing so, and then I'll be done. I've gone on for a while now, and I appreciate your patience. But it's important, because a post-truth culture elevates feelings and preferences over facts and truth. It makes truth a personal thing and then uses it to sort of get your preferences achieved. But then you look, for 2,000 years, Jesus claimed to be the embodiment of truth. We've ignored him and said, I want to find my fulfillment in things that are neither personal nor true. Think of the things you try to find fulfillment in, that I try to find fulfillment in, that we as a species try to find fulfillment in. Our devices, our experiences, our jobs, our careers, the money we make, our comparison to other people, our beauty, whatever all it is. None of these things are personal, and none of these things is true. And we seek a personal truth. Again, it's the musician, it's the poet who captures it so well. There's this band called Crash Parallel. They have this wonderful song. It's a secular band, by the way, called Rain Delays. And listen to the words. Sleepless nights and endless days, and miniskirts and serving trays, and waking up from rain delays, selling sex for pocket change, and living off the alcohol with no one but a cab to call, lost inside a bathroom stall, this carbon copy life withdrawal. Driving cars we can't afford, making sure we're never bored, living off our own accord between coffee grounds and corner stores. And limousines and cigarettes and chasing dreams with fishing nets and long weekends without regrets. Well, no one here is taking bets. I need someone to believe in, someone to fill this space with grace, to look into my eyes and touch my face, someone to make me belong, someone to make me strong, someone to make me alive. We're not looking for something, some experience, some preference to fulfill us. We know we need someone, but we don't need someone who's another human being who's just as messed up as we are. We need the transcendent to fulfill us. We've been looking for things that are neither personal nor true to fulfill us, and we can find the clarity that brings us hope in Christ, because in Christ, truth is a person. Right. Let's pray. Bow your heads and pray with me. Father, I thank you for the opportunity to be here amongst these wonderful people in this unique city where so many contrarieties exist, where we have decadence and need, where we have pleasure and pain all in the same place. I thank you for the light that this church has been, for Pastor Derek and Rocky and the entire team here at this church. It's been such a wonderful time to be here with everybody. What a blessing it's been for me, and I hope it's been for the rest of everybody who's been here. Lord, help us to see you more clearer. Help us to see you clearer so that we can see each other clearer and be understood, Lord. And I'm asking this, Lord, for a response today. So I'm going to ask you, heads bowed, all you got to do is raise your hand. That's all. This is the time now when you're going to actually be face to face with truth about who you are and what God thinks of you. If you're a person who needs to be understood, to have that understanding between you and God so that you can have understanding with other people and have the freedom that comes from knowing who you are and you've been aching for it, will you just slip your hand up while you're here? Anybody in the room who has that need, who sees that? I see that hand. There's one. There's more. There's one over there. There's more. I see them. Father, I thank you for that hand over there on the right and over here on the right further still. Here down here in the front. Thank you so much. Anybody else? This is the time now. If you're here and you need that freedom, and you haven't had it in a long time or haven't sensed it, now's the time. There's another one. Click one up. There they are. There's another. I can see the hearts moving and the minds being touched by the truth of the gospel, Lord. I'm going to pray now. Father, I thank you for these people, every one of them, and the hands that have gone up. There's transformation that happens in that simple gesture of raising a hand, of saying, I want to be understood. I want to know who I am, and if I know who you think I am, then I'll know who I am, and maybe I'll know who others are too, and there's a hope that can happen, Lord. I thank you, Lord, for the fact that you give us these things, not that we deserve them, but you are gracious and you give them, at whatever cost to us, at whatever cost to you. You are the one who gives and pays a price for us. Thank you for the gifts and for the wonderful hands that have gone up here, Lord. May this be a transformative time for them, that they recognize their sin before you, but they recognize you're a Savior who has saved them, and they no longer need to live in that sense of sin, but they can live in the sense of victory that you have garnered them and that you will transform them day by day. It'll be a long, tough process, but you have told us you will never forsake us. You will be with us, sanctifying us until the end of the age. Thank you, Father, for these people and for the salvations we see here today and for the coming to know who you are and who they are. We pray these things in the name of your blessed Son, who we love so much, Jesus Christ. Amen. God bless you. Thank you so much.